My name is Jennifer Thompson. I'm 36 years old, and 3 days before Thanksgiving, my own sister told me I was not welcome at our family dinner because their new social circle had no place for losers. She said it while standing inside a kitchen I had helped renovate, beside a refrigerator I had paid to replace, while her children attended a private academy whose tuition had been leaving my bank account every month for almost 4 years. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her that I had covered their health insurance deductible after an emergency surgery, paid for summer camps, repaired their roof, and quietly transferred money whenever her husband claimed another commission check was delayed. I simply looked at the family photograph on her counter, noticed my face had been folded behind the frame, and said, "Then you should probably stop accepting a loser's money." Her smile disappeared. That night, I sat alone on a nearly empty stretch of beach outside Wilmington, but I wasn't crying over Thanksgiving. I was reviewing bank statements. By midnight, I had canceled 6 automatic payments, removed 2 authorized users from my credit card, frozen a tuition account, and revoked access to an emergency fund my sister believed belonged to her. The total was $4,860 every month. At 12:17 a.m., my phone began vibrating. First came the missed calls, then the threats. Then a message that made me realize this was not simply about an ungrateful family. Someone had used my name to guarantee a debt I had never agreed to pay. And when I opened the attached document, I saw my signature at the bottom, perfectly copied, completely fraudulent, and tied to the house where Thanksgiving dinner was about to be served. Before I tell you what that document revealed, and what happened when my family realized their so-called loser controlled everything keeping them afloat, tell me, what time is it where you are, and where are you watching from? I want to see how far Jennifer's story travels tonight. I had spent 12 years becoming the person my family called whenever something broke. I was a marine equipment calibration specialist, which meant I inspected navigation systems, emergency transmitters, and pressure instruments used on commercial vessels. It was highly technical work, physically demanding, and almost invisible to anyone outside the industry. My sister liked to describe me as the woman who fixes boat gadgets, usually with a laugh that made my profession sound like a hobby. What she never mentioned was that my certifications took years to earn, my work prevented accidents, and my income was the reason her family had survived several financial disasters. The first rescue happened 6 years earlier, when her husband lost money investing in a restaurant expansion he had never properly researched. They were 3 months behind on their mortgage and too ashamed to tell our parents. I paid the arrears because 2 frightened children were sleeping in that house. The second rescue came when my sister wanted the children transferred to Cape Harbor Academy after she became convinced public school would damage their future connections. She asked me to cover 1 semester. 1 semester became a year. 1 year became 4. Whenever I tried to discuss an end date, she would send me photographs of school projects, recital costumes, or handwritten cards saying, "Thank you, Aunt Jen." I stayed because I loved those children, but love slowly became leverage. The Thanksgiving rejection was different because it exposed what she truly thought of me. She had recently joined a waterfront charity board and had become obsessed with impressing wealthy donors. Her husband had started introducing himself as a property developer, even though most of his income came from selling luxury boat slips on commission. They wanted Thanksgiving to look polished: catered food, imported wine, matching table settings, and guests who might help him secure a new development contract. Apparently, an unmarried woman who spent her days in shipyards did not fit the image. When I asked whether the children knew I had been excluded, my sister shrugged and said, "They'll be busy with people who can actually help their future." That sentence was the final drop. Not because she called me a loser, but because she had reduced every relationship to usefulness while continuing to use me more than anyone. On the beach that night, I opened a spreadsheet I had avoided for years. Tuition, dental bills, sports fees, mortgage support, utilities, groceries, vacations, emergency transfers, and the home renovation loan came to $218,740. I had given it willingly, but I had given it under the belief that I was helping relatives recover, not financing a performance. After canceling the payments, I called the credit bureaus and froze my files. That was when an alert appeared for a $164,000 home equity line connected to my Social Security number. The application listed me as a co-owner of my sister's home and claimed I had signed as a guarantor. I had never owned 1 inch of that property. I downloaded the loan packet and found an electronic signature that looked almost identical to mine. The verification page showed that the document had been opened from an old tablet I once lent my sister during a family vacation. Beneath the signature was a false employment statement inflating my annual income and identifying me as a silent partner in her husband's property company. I suddenly understood why he had been asking for copies of my professional licenses, tax documents, and proof of income over the previous year. Each request had arrived wrapped in a reasonable explanation: academy aid forms, insurance updates, family estate planning. I had trusted them. They had built a financial identity from pieces I handed over myself. My hands were steady when I called the lender's fraud department. I told the investigator I had not authorized the loan, had never signed the application, and had just discovered my identity was attached to a property I did not own. The investigator placed an immediate hold on the remaining credit line and warned me not to confront anyone until the documents were secured. 20 minutes later, my sister texted, "What did you do? Mark's account is frozen." Then came another message. "You are destroying this family because your feelings got hurt." I stared at those words and wondered how many times a person could steal from you before they stopped calling your resistance selfish. The next morning, I met my closest friend, Heidi Lawson, at a small breakfast counter near the marina. Heidi was an insurance fraud analyst, which was exactly the kind of coincidence my sister would later call unfair. I did not need a motivational speech from her. I needed someone who understood records, patterns, and how ordinary paperwork could hide an extraordinary betrayal. I slid the loan packet across the table and watched her expression change as she examined the employment figures, digital certificate, and property declaration. "This isn't desperation," she said. "This is planning." She noticed details I had missed. The application claimed the home renovation had increased the property's value by nearly $300,000, but the attached invoices came from a construction company registered to one of Mark's former coworkers. Several invoices were dated before the company legally existed. A contractor's certification used the same misspelling that appeared in Mark's emails. Most disturbing of all, the packet included a letter supposedly written by me, stating that I intended to assume the loan if Samantha and Mark experienced temporary cash flow limitations. The language sounded clinical, but one sentence came directly from an email I had sent years earlier after paying their mortgage. "I will not let the children lose their home over a temporary setback." They had taken an act of compassion and converted it into permanent consent. Heidi urged me to preserve everything and contact an attorney. Before noon, I had retained Melissa Grant, a financial crimes lawyer recommended through my employer's legal network. Melissa told me the evidence supported potential claims involving identity theft, fraudulent inducement, forgery, and misrepresentation to a lender. She also warned me that the bank could move against the house if the loan had been obtained through fraud, and the borrowers could not refinance it without my income. That should have frightened me. Instead, it clarified the stakes. Samantha and Mark had not only taken money, they had built their lifestyle on the assumption that I would remain too loyal to expose them. While Melissa prepared formal notices, my sister changed tactics. Her first messages were angry. Her next messages were gentle. She said the Thanksgiving comment had been a joke that landed badly. She said the children were crying. She said our mother was confused and heartbroken. Then she sent a photograph of the dining table with one empty chair and wrote, "We always saved you a place." I enlarged the photograph. There was no place card at that seat, no plate, and no glass. The chair had been pulled in from another room after I canceled the payments. She was manufacturing evidence of kindness because the real issue was no longer Thanksgiving. It was control. That afternoon, she arrived at my apartment with Mark. I did not invite them inside. Mark began by saying the loan was a misunderstanding caused by their broker. Samantha stood behind him, staring at me as though I had violated some private rule by reading documents created in my own name. "You knew we were renovating," she said. "You knew the house was for the children. Knowing about paint and cabinets is not agreeing to a $164,000 debt," I answered. Mark insisted I had verbally agreed to help secure financing during a family dinner. I asked him to name the date. He could not. I asked why the application listed me as a co-owner. He said the bank required a simplified structure. I asked why my income had been overstated by $42,000. His face tightened. Then Samantha stopped pretending. "After everything we've done to make you part of this family, you're going to hide behind technicalities?" she demanded. The question almost made me laugh. They had excluded me from Thanksgiving and now described forged debt as inclusion. I told them all communication would go through my attorney. Samantha stepped closer and lowered her voice. "Think carefully. The children will lose their school. We could lose the house. Mom will know you caused it." "No," I said. "She'll know you risked it." Mark called me vindictive. Samantha called me jealous. Neither of them apologized for using my identity. As they turned to leave, I asked one final question. "When you called me a loser, did you already know you had used my income to convince a bank you were successful?" Mark stopped walking. Samantha did not. That was the moment I knew he had not been the only one involved. She had always claimed he controlled the finances, but her silence answered what her tears never would. Thanksgiving morning began with 37 messages in the family group chat. My mother asked everyone to calm down. An aunt I had not spoken to in 8 months wrote that money should never divide blood relatives. A cousin suggested I continue paying the children's tuition until January so the adults could resolve their disagreement privately. No one asked why my signature appeared on a loan. That was because Samantha had already told them her version. I had voluntarily promised financial support, become resentful after not being invited to an adult networking dinner, and withdrawn everything without warning. She described the forged loan as a paperwork correction I had previously approved. She also claimed I was emotionally unstable from working too many hours. For years, she had depended on my silence. That morning, I decided silence was no longer kindness. I posted one message. I did not withdraw a promise. I discovered a $164,000 loan obtained with my personal information and a signature I did not provide. My attorney has notified the lender. I will not discuss an active fraud investigation in this chat. Then I attached only the first page of the bank's acknowledgement confirming my fraud complaint. I did not share private account numbers or accuse anyone beyond what I could prove. The group fell silent for 11 minutes. Then Mark left the chat. Samantha called me 12 times. I turned off my phone and drove to Masonboro Island, where I planned to spend the afternoon walking, reading, and eating a sandwich that did not require me to perform gratitude for people who had exploited it. At 2:40 p.m., Heidi called my work phone. She said Samantha had posted publicly that I was trying to make her children homeless over a family misunderstanding. The post included a cropped screenshot of an old message where I wrote, "I'll always make sure the kids are safe." It excluded the next line. "But you and Mark need a real repayment plan because I cannot continue financing the household." Samantha's charity board friends were commenting with prayers, sympathy, and offers to connect her with legal help. Then someone asked why a successful property developer needed his sister-in-law to guarantee his home loan. The question remained unanswered. By evening, the story had begun to collapse on its own. A former client of Mark's commented that he had also exaggerated investment returns during a marina sales pitch. A subcontractor claimed he was still owed $28,000. Another woman wrote privately to me that Mark had persuaded her parents to invest in a waterfront redevelopment that had never received zoning approval. I forwarded every message to Melissa without responding. The following Monday, the lender confirmed that almost the entire home equity line had already been withdrawn. Only $22,000 had gone toward renovations. $40,000 had been transferred into Mark's business account. $35,000 had paid overdue credit cards. $12,000 had funded a charity gala sponsorship under Samantha's name. Another $17,000 had covered private school expenses during months when Samantha told me my payments were being used directly for tuition. The remainder had gone toward a leased SUV, marina fees, luxury clothing, and cash withdrawals. I had not been supporting struggling parents. I had been preserving their image while they expanded it. The most painful discovery involved the children's school account. For 2 years, Samantha had told me tuition increased because one child needed additional academic services. In reality, the academy had granted them partial financial aid. Samantha continued collecting the full amount from me and used the difference elsewhere. She had turned her own child's learning challenges into a fundraising story. Melissa advised me to file a police report immediately. I did. A detective took the electronic records, banking correspondence, messages requesting my tax forms, and the tablet access logs. I expected guilt to crush me as I signed the statement. Instead, I felt grief. Grief for the sister I believed I had, grief for the children who would eventually understand what happened, and grief for the years I confused endurance with loyalty. That evening, Samantha appeared at my workplace. She stood outside the controlled access gate in a cream coat, shouting my name while 2 technicians and a harbor supervisor watched. Security asked her to leave. She refused until I came outside. "You went to the police?" she screamed. "Against your own sister?" "Someone used my identity to borrow money," I said. "The police determine who is responsible." "You know what this will do to us. You knew what it could do to me." She accused me of enjoying the attention. She said I had always resented her marriage, her children, and her social life. Then she made her first honest statement. "You were never supposed to find out because we were going to pay it back." I watched the security officer activate his body camera. "Who is we, Samantha?" I asked. She realized too late what she had admitted. Her face changed. Mark, who had been waiting inside their SUV, opened the passenger door and shouted at her to stop talking. That moment became part of the official record. Before leaving, Samantha pointed at me and said, "When the children hate you, remember this." I thought about the school payments, the fabricated bills, and the Thanksgiving chair added after the fact. "Children eventually grow old enough to read," I replied. "Make sure you're ready for that." 2 weeks later, Samantha asked to meet at a playground. She said the children needed to see me and promised Mark would not attend. I refused to discuss the investigation, but I agreed to spend 30 minutes with them because they were not responsible for what their parents had done. When I arrived, the children ran toward me, but their excitement quickly turned into confusion. The older one asked why I was taking away their school and house. The younger one asked whether I was angry because I had not received a Thanksgiving present. Those questions were not spontaneous. They had been rehearsed. Samantha sat on a bench watching closely, waiting for their pain to weaken my boundaries. I knelt and told them, "Adults are dealing with a money problem. None of it is your fault, and I love you exactly the same." I did not accuse their parents or burden them with legal details. Samantha looked disappointed that I had not defended myself. After the children returned to the climbing structure, she whispered that the bank had issued a default notice and the academy would suspend enrollment unless the past due balance was paid. She asked for $25,000 to stabilize everything, while Mark arranged new financing. I asked whether she planned to repay me. She said repayment should not matter when children were involved. I asked whether she would sign a formal loan agreement drafted by my attorney. She refused immediately. That told me she did not want help. She wanted the old system restored. Then she offered a trade. If I withdrew the fraud complaint, she would admit the Thanksgiving comment was wrong and welcome me back into the family. For a few seconds, I could only stare at her. She believed access to a dinner table was worth more than my legal identity. "You're negotiating with something that no longer has value," I said. Samantha's face hardened. She accused me of abandoning the children. I reminded her that I had paid more toward their education than either parent during the previous 4 years. "And that's why you should keep doing it," she answered. There it was, the belief beneath every apology. My past generosity had not inspired gratitude. It had established a permanent obligation. I ended the meeting and hugged the children goodbye. As I walked away, the older one ran after me and slipped a folded drawing into my hand. It showed our family at Thanksgiving. Everyone had a chair except me. I was drawn outside the window holding a bag of money. At the bottom, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "Mom says you can come inside when you stop being mean." I did not cry until I reached my car. Then I photographed the drawing, sent it to Melissa for documentation, and placed the original in a protective folder. Not because I wanted to use a child against my sister, but because Samantha had already done exactly that. Was family still sacred when children were taught to measure love by payment? How much manipulation was I expected to forgive before forgiveness became permission? That night, I booked a 3-week road trip through the Outer Banks. I had saved enough from the canceled payments to cover the entire journey without touching my long-term savings. For the first time in years, money leaving my account represented my own life. Before I left, the case accelerated. The lender's investigators concluded that the electronic signature had originated from my old tablet while it was connected to Samantha's home network. The application used photographs of my driver's license taken from a family cloud folder. My supposed consent letter had been created on Samantha's laptop. Mark's broker claimed Samantha provided the documents and assured him I was a silent investor who preferred not to attend meetings. Mark responded by blaming Samantha. He told investigators she handled household financing and had misinterpreted my willingness to help. Samantha blamed Mark and said she signed documents he placed in front of her without reading them. Their united front lasted less than 1 month. The bank accelerated the loan, reported the suspected fraud, and began foreclosure proceedings because the legitimate mortgage was already delinquent. Mark's employer suspended him after several clients complained about misrepresentations. Samantha was asked to resign from the charity board when members learned that $12,000 from the disputed loan had funded the gala sponsorship that earned her a leadership position. She posted online that she was being persecuted by jealous people, but each new statement contradicted the previous one. First, I had approved the loan. Then, I had misunderstood it. Then Mark had handled everything. Then the broker had forged the records. By the time she claimed hackers were responsible, even our mother stopped reposting her messages. 3 days before my departure, I received a formal invitation to a family meeting at Samantha's house. Melissa advised me not to go alone, so Heidi drove with me and waited nearby while I carried a recorder permitted under state law and a folder containing only documents my attorney had approved for discussion. The house no longer looked like the stage set from Thanksgiving. The leased SUV was gone. Red notices sat on the kitchen counter. Several rooms had been stripped of decorative furniture for resale. Our mother and 2 relatives sat at the dining table, finally serious. Samantha began by saying the family needed healing. Mark interrupted and said he needed everyone to understand that Samantha had managed the application. She turned on him so quickly that the children, listening from the hallway, froze. For 20 minutes they exposed each other. Mark said Samantha demanded the charity sponsorship because she wanted access to wealthy donors. Samantha said Mark withdrew money for failed investments. Mark said she inflated the school expenses. Samantha said he created the fake contractor invoices. Neither denied my information had been used. They simply argued over whose idea had caused more damage. Our mother looked at me and asked why I had not warned her sooner. I opened the folder and placed copies of my canceled checks, bank transfers, tuition receipts, and messages on the table. I warned everyone every time I said the support had to end, I replied. You called me selfish because continuing was easier for you. My mother began to cry, but I did not rush to comfort her. She admitted Samantha had told her I volunteered to pay indefinitely. I showed her 3 messages where I requested repayment plans and received guilt instead. One relative who had criticized me in the group chat quietly apologized. Samantha slapped her palm against the table. So that's it? Everyone turns against me because Jennifer has paperwork? No, I said. They're turning toward facts. Mark then offered me a deal. He wanted me to tell the bank I had verbally authorized the loan, but misunderstood the amount. In exchange, they would sign a repayment agreement and stop speaking negatively about me. Melissa had predicted the proposal. I asked him whether he understood that he was requesting I submit a false statement to a financial institution. He said I was twisting his words. Heidi entered after hearing raised voices, and Mark immediately lowered his voice. Samantha accused me of staging an ambush. I reminded her that she had invited me. Then the older child stepped into the room holding the drawing I had returned in a sealed envelope for Samantha. Did Aunt Jen pay for my school? The child asked. No one answered. Did she pay for our house too? Samantha told the child to go upstairs. The child refused and asked why they had said I was poor and jealous if I had been paying for everything. That question did more damage than any speech I could have given. Samantha's face crumpled, not with remorse, but with the horror of losing control of the story. Mark walked out. He packed a suitcase that night and moved into a furnished rental paid for by his brother. Within a week, he filed for legal separation and began cooperating with investigators in an attempt to reduce his own exposure. Samantha called me from 3 different numbers, sometimes apologizing, sometimes threatening to reveal private childhood stories, sometimes begging me to rescue the house for the children. I blocked each number and forwarded every voicemail to Melissa. Then I began my road trip. I crossed the bridge toward the Outer Banks before sunrise, carrying no dramatic farewell and no fantasy that distance would erase what happened. Freedom was not forgetting. Freedom was refusing to return to the role that had nearly destroyed me. During the first week of the trip, I visited small maritime museums, climbed weathered lighthouse stairs, and stopped at independent repair docks where people were surprised to meet a woman who could identify a faulty emergency beacon by sound. I had spent years allowing my family to define my work as evidence that I lacked status. Away from them, I remembered what my profession actually represented: precision, responsibility, and the ability to detect danger before it became disaster. The lesson was almost embarrassingly clear. I had been trained to test alarms on ships, yet I had ignored every alarm in my own family. The emergency requests that never ended, the documents they needed urgently, the repayment conversations that became accusations, the love offered most warmly when money was due. Halfway through the journey, Melissa called with an update. Prosecutors had not yet made final charging decisions, but the bank had filed a civil action seeking recovery from Samantha and Mark. Mark had lost his position permanently after an internal review found he had misrepresented client investments. Samantha's charity board issued a public statement distancing itself from her gala contribution. The academy allowed the children to finish the semester through an emergency assistance program, but Samantha had to transfer them afterward. The house was listed in a court-supervised sale. Mark's property company collapsed when investors withdrew. Samantha moved with the children into our mother's smaller home, where luxury appearances were no longer possible. I did not celebrate the children losing their bedrooms or schools. Revenge did not feel like cheering while innocent people suffered. The satisfaction came from something quieter. The consequences finally belonged to the adults who created them. I was no longer absorbing every impact so they could continue pretending nothing was wrong. Samantha sent one final email titled, "You got what you wanted." She wrote that she had lost her marriage, home, reputation, friendships, and children's respect because I refused to show mercy. I read it twice before replying through my attorney. My response was one sentence. Those losses followed your decisions, not my boundary. Several months later, the civil case ended with a settlement. The fraudulent guarantee was removed from my credit history. The remaining debt was assigned to Samantha and Mark, and they agreed to reimburse a portion of my legal expenses. Mark entered a separate agreement with affected clients. Samantha avoided incarceration but received probation, mandatory financial counseling, and a restitution obligation after accepting responsibility for submitting false documents. She was also prohibited from opening accounts in anyone else's name or acting as a financial representative for her children without oversight. The outcome did not restore the years or the trust, but it placed the truth into a record she could not edit. My relationship with the children continued carefully through supervised visits arranged by our mother. I never discussed the case unless they asked an age-appropriate question. I did not need them to hate their parents in order to love me. I only needed our relationship to stop being used as a payment demand. One afternoon, the older child apologized for the drawing. I said no apology was necessary. You drew what you were told, I explained. Growing up means learning that adults can be wrong, even when they sound certain. The child asked whether I would ever forgive Samantha. I answered honestly, maybe forgiveness will become possible, but trust requires evidence. That distinction changed me. Forgiveness is an internal decision to stop carrying poison. Reconciliation is an external agreement that requires accountability, safety, and sustained change. They are not the same, and no one is entitled to both. On the final day of my trip, I returned to the beach where I had canceled those payments. The place looked ordinary. There was no perfect sunset and no dramatic sign from the universe. I stood beside my car, checked my phone, and saw a deposit from a new consulting contract I had accepted with a coastal safety firm. For years, nearly $5,000 a month had disappeared into someone else's performance of success. Now, I used part of that money to open a scholarship fund for women entering marine technical trades. I named it the Beacon Grant because a beacon does not rescue a ship by carrying it. It helps people see where they are before they crash. My family called me a loser because my life did not look impressive at their Thanksgiving table. But the table, the house, the school, the clothes, and the status had been supported by the woman they were ashamed to invite. When I removed my money, I did not destroy their lives. I removed the disguise. So what would you have done in my place? Would you have kept paying to protect the children, even if that allowed the manipulation to continue? Or would you have stepped back and forced the adults to face what they had built? My answer is no longer complicated. Love should be generous, but it should never require surrendering your identity, your dignity, or your legal safety. Blood can create a connection, but behavior determines whether that connection deserves access to your life. Self-respect is not cruelty. Boundaries are not revenge. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself, and even for the people exploiting you, is stop paying the cost of their lies.
Thank you for following this emotional story from beginning to end. Everything in this video is fictional and intended only for entertainment, education, and reflection. We hope it reminds you that when someone makes you feel like your feelings are too much, they probably may not be your emotions, but their unwillingness to treat them with care. You deserve people who can respect your hurt without making you apologize for having one.